In a bustling mall on an ordinary Tuesday morning, Officer David Chen notices something off about a woman and child. Subtle signs that most would miss. What begins as a routine mall patrol leads Chen and FBI agents into a dark underworld beneath. The city's surface, where children are treated as commodities and hope seems lost. They're survivors who've been secretly mapping escape routes, leaving signs, and waiting for someone to notice. Before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe because I have something really special for you tomorrow. And now back to the video. David Chen had worked the morning shift at Riverside Mall for 3 years, and he'd developed a sixth sense for trouble. Most days involved nothing more serious than lost children, shoplifting teens, or the occasional dispute over parking spots. But something about this Tuesday morning felt different. He was making his usual rounds past the food court when he first noticed them. A woman and a small boy, probably around 6 years old. On the surface, nothing seemed unusual. Well-dressed woman, child finishing what looked like a breakfast sandwich. But Chen's instincts, honed by 12 years on the force, picked up subtle warnings. The boy wasn't eating like a child normally would at breakfast. His movements were mechanical, his eyes constantly darting around. The woman's body language was off too. She sat rigidly, checking her phone every few seconds, her other hand maintaining a tight grip on the boy's wrist. "Just shopping with my grandson," she'd said cheerfully when she caught Chen looking their way. But something in her smile didn't reach her eyes. Chen continued his patrol, but kept them in his peripheral vision. The woman's story might be perfectly innocent, but he'd learned to trust his gut. And right now, his gut was screaming that something wasn't right. He watched as they finished their meal, the woman practically pulling the boy to his feet. That's when it happened. As they passed his position, the child's eyes met his. In that brief moment, Chen saw raw fear. The boy's lips moved, forming 4 quiet words that would change everything. "She's not my grandmother." Chen's training kicked in instantly. He knew he had seconds to act before they disappeared into the morning crowd. But he also knew he had to handle this carefully. If he was wrong, he could be facing serious consequences. The woman was already accelerating. Her pace, pulling the boy toward the mall's north exit. Chen moved to intercept, his mind racing through protocols and procedures. One wrong move could put the child in danger. One moment of hesitation could mean losing them forever. What happened next would test everything he'd learned in his years of service, starting a chain of events that would expose a criminal operation reaching far beyond a single attempted kidnapping at a shopping mall. Officer Chen's next actions were calculated to appear casual while closing the distance to the pair. "Ma'am," he called out, keeping his voice friendly. "I think your grandson dropped something back there." The woman's reaction confirmed his suspicions. Her shoulders tensed, her grip on the boy tightened, and she quickened her pace without looking back. "We're in a hurry," she called over her shoulder. Chen pressed his radio's panic button, 2 quick clicks that would alert mall security and bring backup without alerting the suspect. Years of training had taught him the delicate balance between acting quickly and avoiding escalation that could endanger the child. "I really need you to stop for a moment," he said more firmly, closing the distance. The boy's eyes met his again, a silent plea for help. The woman made a break for it, yanking the child toward the exit. But Chen had anticipated this. He'd already radioed the description to security, and the emergency locks on the north exit had quietly engaged. "Let go of the child, and put your hands where I can see them," Chen commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 12 years on the force. Mall patrons were scattering now, creating space around the unfolding situation. Instead of complying, the woman pulled something from her purse, a document she thrust toward Chen. "This is ridiculous. I have papers showing I'm his legal guardian. His mother authorized me to—" "We'll verify all that," Chen interrupted, noting how the document trembled in her hand. "But first, I need you to release the child." The boy was shaking now, tears streaming down his face. The woman's grip was leaving visible marks on his wrist. 2 mall security officers approached from behind, having secured the exits. Chen could hear police sirens in the distance. His backup was minutes away, but something in the woman's eyes told him she wasn't finished. "You don't understand," she hissed, her carefully maintained facade cracking. "Do you know who I work for?" "What?" "They'll do if—" She never finished the sentence. The boy chose that moment to bite down hard on her hand. As her grip loosened in surprise, Chen moved in, smoothly separating them and placing himself between the child and the suspect. "Run to the security officers," he told the boy, who didn't hesitate. The woman lunged after him, but Chen was ready, executing a textbook restraint maneuver. "You're making a terrible mistake," she spat as he secured her hands behind her back. "My associates will—" "Will what?" came a new voice. Detective Sarah Martinez strode through the gathering crowd, badge displayed. She hadn't been Chen's backup call. She'd been conducting her own surveillance of the mall. "Officer Chen," Martinez nodded professionally, but he caught the tension in her voice. "Looks like you just crashed a 3-month trafficking investigation. But you might have helped us crack it wide open." The woman's face went pale. In the distance, more sirens approached. "The boy," Chen started, but Martinez was already shaking her head. "Tommy Reynolds, age 6, reported missing from his home in Cedar Rapids 2 days ago. This is the 3rd attempted trafficking incident at this mall in 2 months. We've been watching, waiting for them to lead us to their organization." Chen felt his stomach twist. "They're using the mall as a transfer point?" Martinez nodded grimly. "High traffic, multiple exits, easy to blend in. But thanks to those 4 words that boy whispered to you, we might finally have the break we need." The woman was silent now, but her earlier words echoed in Chen's mind. "Do you know who I work for?" This wasn't just a random kidnapping. It was part of something bigger, something organized. Tommy sat in the security office, wrapped in a shock blanket, talking to a child services worker. His parents were already on their way, having been notified the moment his identity was confirmed. "The papers she showed you," Martinez said, examining them through an evidence bag. "They're exceptional forgeries. These people have resources, connections. That's why they've been so hard to catch." Chen watched as more officers arrived, securing the scene and gathering witness statements. "If they're that organized, they'll have people watching. They might already know their operation is compromised." Martinez's expression was grim. "Count on it. Which means we have maybe hours before they clean house and disappear. Unless—" She looked thoughtfully at their suspect, who sat handcuffed and silent in a security office chair. "Unless we can turn this into an opportunity. Make them think." Their operative was caught in a routine stop, not a targeted investigation. What happened next would test everything he'd learned in his years of service, starting a chain of events that would expose a criminal operation reaching far beyond a single attempted kidnapping at a shopping mall. Chen understood. If the organization believed their cover was still intact, they might lead investigators to bigger targets. "I need you to write up your encounter exactly as it happened," Martinez instructed. "Every detail, especially what made you first notice them. We're building a profile of their operators, their methods." Next time, Chen interrupted sharply. "They won't stop," Martinez said quietly. "This is big business for them. When this operative doesn't make the delivery, they'll try again. Different mall, different operative, different kid. Unless we can follow the trail back to the source." Chen looked again at Tommy, seeing not just one rescued child, but all the others still at risk. Those 4 whispered words hadn't just saved one boy. They'd opened a door that might help save many more. The investigation was just beginning, and somewhere in the city, people were already moving to contain their exposure. But they hadn't counted on a child's courage or a cop's instincts. Now it was a race against time to unravel their organization before they could vanish and restart elsewhere. What happened next would test everything he'd learned in his years of service, starting A chain of events that would expose a criminal operation reaching far beyond a single attempted kidnapping at a shopping mall. In the mall's security office, Detective Martinez set up a makeshift command center while they waited for the FBI's trafficking task force to arrive. The suspect, now identified through fingerprints as Catherine Wells, maintained her silence, but her phone hadn't stopped buzzing. "They're getting nervous," Martinez observed, watching the incoming messages stack up. 6 different numbers in the last hour, all burner phones. Chen studied the security footage of Wells's movements before he'd intercepted her. She did 3. Complete circuits of the mall first. Looking for surveillance or waiting for someone? Both, probably. Martinez pulled up a map on her laptop. In the other incidents, the children were handed off to different operators. Multiple stages, making them harder to track. Tommy's parents had arrived, their tearful reunion taking place under careful observation. Chen noticed how the boy kept looking at the doors, jumping at sudden movements. "He's remembering," the child psychologist explained quietly. "When he's ready, he might be able to tell us about other places, other people involved." Wells's phone buzzed again. Martinez checked the incoming message through their monitoring equipment. Her expression hardened. "They're mobilizing cleanup crews," she said grimly. 3 locations. They think their operative was caught by accident, but they're not taking chances. "We have to move," Chen said, but Martinez held up a hand. "Wait, look at this pattern." She pointed to a series of coordinates embedded in the seemingly random messages. "They're not just cleaning house, they're redirecting their pipeline, and they're sloppy because they're rushing." The FBI team arrived, led by Special Agent Diana Wong. She took one look at the message patterns and immediately started issuing orders. "We've got similar operations running in 6 cities, she explained. "Usually by the time we identify a transfer point, they've already moved on. But this time we caught them mid-operation," Martinez finished. "Because a 6-year-old boy was brave enough to speak up." Chen watched Tommy with his parents, seeing how the boy still maintained awareness of his surroundings, checking exits just like he'd been doing earlier. He was planning that moment, Chen realized, watching for someone who might help. "Smart kid," Wong agreed. "And lucky you were there to notice. Most wouldn't have picked up on the signs." Wells's phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. A single word. "Compromise?" Martinez smiled grimly. "They're asking if she's been made as part of their organization. Time to play this carefully." She typed out a response, matching Wells' previous text. "Patterns. Routine stop. Mall cop playing hero. No exposure." The reply came quickly. "Proceed to secondary. Package delay only." "They're redirecting the handoff," Wong said sharply. "If we move now, we'll get another low-level operator," Martinez interrupted. "But look at these coordinates. They're not just moving the handoff point. They're showing us their whole transfer route." Chen studied the pattern emerging on their screens. The mall wasn't just a random location. It was part of a carefully planned sequence of handoffs designed to make tracking impossible. But in their rush to redirect after Wells' capture, they'd revealed too much. 4 more locations, Wong noted, all busy public places. They hide their operations in plain sight, counting on people not paying attention. "Like they counted on Tommy being too scared to speak up," Chen added. "Like they count on their victims becoming invisible in crowds." Martinez's phone rang, one of her undercover teams. Multiple vehicles moving from the warehouse district. They're clearing out safe houses. "Let them run," Wong decided. "We've got their pattern now. More importantly, we've got their playbook. Every time they redirect, they have to follow certain protocols. Protocols we can now anticipate." Tommy had fallen asleep in his mother's arms, exhaustion finally overcoming his vigilance. His father spoke quietly with investigators, providing details about the initial abduction that might help identify other operatives. "We'll need your full report," Wong told Chen. "Every detail about what made you notice them. We're building a profile of their behavioral patterns, teaching other officers what to watch for." Chen nodded, but his attention was on Wells. The woman's carefully maintained composure had cracked when she saw Tommy reunited with his parents. For just a moment, something like shame had crossed her face. "She's not a true believer," he said quietly to Martinez. "She's following orders. But something about this operation bothers her." "Good catch," Martinez replied. "Maybe that's our next angle. While the FBI tracks their movement patterns, we work on the human element. These operators, they're chosen for their ability to blend in, appear trustworthy, but they're also chosen for their vulnerabilities." Wells' phone buzzed one final time. "Clean and clear. Resume standard protocol." "They think they've contained the damage," Wong said with satisfaction. "They don't realize they've just given us a map to their entire operation." Outside the security office, the mall was returning to normal. Shoppers went about their business, unaware of the drama that had unfolded, or the trafficking network that had been operating in their midst. But thanks to 4 whispered words and 1 cop's careful observation, that network had just become visible. And once something becomes visible, it becomes vulnerable. The investigation was about to enter a new phase, one that would reach far beyond a single attempted kidnapping in a shopping mall. 6 hours after Tommy's rescue, Officer Chen found himself in an FBI surveillance van, watching feeds from 3 different shopping centers across the city. They'd identified the trafficking network's backup transfer points from Wells' phone data, but something still bothered him about the pattern. "They're too confident," he said, studying the monitors. "Even after losing an operative, they're sticking to public locations." Detective Martinez nodded, sipping cold coffee. "Because it works. Who looks twice at a woman in child shopping? How many times have you seen a kid throwing a tantrum and looked away? They hide in normal," Special Agent Wong added. "Make the abnormal seem routine." The radio crackled, one of their undercover teams reporting movement at the South Side Mall. A woman matching another known operative's description had entered with a young girl. "Same protocol as Wells," Martinez observed. 3 circuits of the mall, stopping at designated points. They're running the same playbook." But Chen was shaking his head. "No, something's different. Look at her hands." The operative's fingers kept tapping a specific pattern on her purse strap. The girl's eyes darted to each security camera they passed. "They're putting on a show," he realized. "They know we're watching." Wong straightened in her chair. "Pull all teams back, now." The aye order came just in time. Within minutes, local news vans began arriving at each surveillance location. Anonymous tips had reported suspicious police activity targeting innocent shoppers. "They're not just hiding in plain sight," Martinez said grimly. "They're weaponizing public perception. Make us look like we're harassing normal people. Make our surveillance more difficult." Back at headquarters, Wells had finally started talking. Not about her organization, she was too afraid for that, but about how she'd been recruited. "They found me when I was desperate," she told Chen during his interview. "Offered a way out of debt, said I'd just be helping transport packages. By the time I realized what kind of packages," she shuddered. "They know everything about me, my family, where my sister's kids go to school. Even if I wanted to help you, we can protect them," Chen started, but Wells laughed bitterly. "Like, you protected the last 3 people who tried to inform. The accountant who had a car accident, the security guard who overdosed, the teenage runaway who simply disappeared." Chen shared a look with Martinez through the observation window. This was bigger than they'd initially thought. Wong entered. "With new information. Wells' phone gave us more than just transfer protocols. We've identified financial patterns. This isn't just trafficking. It's money laundering, fraud, political payoffs. The kids are just one part of their operation." "But why?" Chen demanded. "Why risk trafficking when they've got other revenue streams?" "Because it's not about money," came a new voice. Tommy's father stood in the doorway. He'd been helping investigators trace his son's initial abduction. "It's about power, control. These kids are taken to order. Rich people with specific requests. He couldn't finish. Chen felt sick, remembering Tommy's careful observation of his surroundings, his planned whisper for help. How many other children were out there, watching, waiting for someone to notice? "We've got another problem," Martinez announced, checking her phone. "Remember those news vans? Stories are already running about police harassing families in malls. Departments getting pressure to back off surveillance. They're trying to hide in outrage," Wang realized. "Make it politically difficult to maintain obvious surveillance. Force us to pull back." But Chen was studying the footage again, something clicking in his mind. "Wait. Go back to Wells's initial arrest. Look at Tommy's behavior pattern before he spoke to me." They reviewed the footage. The boy's movements, his careful observation of uniforms and cameras. "He was profiling us," Chen said. "Testing reactions. These kids, they're watching, looking for someone who might actually see them." Martinez caught on. "And the traffickers know this. That's why they're so confident in public spaces. They count on people looking away, not wanting to get involved. So we change the pattern," Wang said. "Stop looking for the traffickers and start looking for the kids who are looking for us," Chen finished. "They're hiding their operation in plain sight? Fine. We'll hide our investigation the same way." Wells was still talking, providing more details about her recruitment, her training, the psychological tactics used to ensure compliance. But Chen's mind was already working on a new approach. Traditional surveillance wasn't going to work. The network was too good at hiding, too skilled at manipulating public perception. But they'd shown their hand when they rushed to redirect after Tommy's rescue. Under pressure, even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises made mistakes. "We need to push them," he told Martinez. "Not by watching their operators, but by making them think we're watching everywhere. Make them rush, make them sloppy. Force them to reveal more of their playbook," Wang agreed. "But carefully. If they realize their whole operation is compromised," the unspoken concern hung in the air. How many children were currently in their pipeline? How many would disappear forever if the organization decided to clean house? They needed to build pressure without showing their full hand. Make the traffickers think they were dealing with routine police work, not a coordinated investigation. Most importantly, they needed to reach the other children like Tommy, the ones who were watching, waiting for someone to notice their silent calls for help. The next phase of the operation began quietly. No marked police cars, no obvious surveillance. Instead, Officer Chen found himself back at his mall patrol, but with a crucial difference. Now he knew exactly what to look for. Movement at the North entrance. Martinez's voice came through his concealed earpiece. She was disguised as a coffee shop worker, maintaining sight lines of the main concourse. "Woman with 2 children, matches profile C." Chen continued his casual patrol, noting how the woman's grip on the smaller child seemed natural to casual observers, but betrayed tension to trained eyes. The older child, around 12, showed the same environmental awareness he'd seen in Tommy. "They're using older kids to help control younger ones," Wang commented from her position in the surveillance van. "Probably threatened their families, too." The woman made her first circuit of the mall, following the same pattern they'd documented from Wells. But this time, they weren't just watching the handler. They were watching the children's reactions to uniformed presence. "The girl keeps checking my position," Chen murmured. "Not with fear. She's gauging response time, looking for opportunities." "Like Tommy did," Martinez agreed. "These kids aren't just victims. They're actively seeking help, testing which adults might notice." The next 3 hours brought similar observations. 4 more potential trafficking groups moved through the mall. To casual observers, nothing seemed amiss. But Chen and his team were building a deeper understanding of the operation's patterns. Their color coding, Martinez realized, reviewing their notes. The handler's accessories indicate the type of transfer. Blue scarf means domestic route, red means international, green means special client. The woman they were currently watching wore a green scarf. The implications made Chen's stomach turn. Visual confirmation, came a new voice. One of the undercover FBI agents posing as a shoe store clerk. Target just received a signal from someone in the food court. Hold positions, Wong ordered. Let's see their whole transfer sequence. They watched as the woman guided her charges toward the food court, her movements casual but purposeful. The older girl's eyes met Chen's briefly as they passed his position. Help us, her expression said clearly. Everything in him wanted to move in to stop this now. But they had to see the whole operation, had to understand how these transfers worked if they wanted to shut down the entire network. The food court contact turned out to be another woman, this one with a teenager who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. But Chen noticed how the boy's slouched posture gave him clear views of all approaches while appearing disinterested. They train the kids to be lookouts, Martinez observed. Use their age to avoid suspicion. The transfer, when it happened, was so smooth most people would have missed it. The two groups merged briefly at the condiment station, then separated. But now, the younger child was with the second woman, their grip less firm but hidden by casual body language. Target moving to east exit, the shoe store agent reported. Second team shadowing, but something had changed. The older girl, still with the first handler, had dropped something, a small piece of paper that skittered across the floor toward Chen's position. He retrieved it casually, maintaining his patrol pattern. Once out of sight, he unfolded the note, 12 more today. Storage under mall. Look for red door. Wong's voice was tense in his earpiece. We can't wait, if there are kids being held under the mall. Agreed, Martinez cut in. All teams, prepare to move. Chen, get ready to intercept the second handler, but carefully. We don't want to spook the rest of their network. Chen was already moving, his mind racing. A storage facility under the Feynes Mall? He knew the service corridors snaked through the building's lower levels, but he'd never seen a red door. Unless the old civil defense shelter, he realized, from the Cold War. It was sealed off years ago, but the access point was marked with a red arrow. Maintenance access still active? Wong asked sharply. Yes, through the loading dock, but if they're using it, they've got someone inside the mall's operations helping them, Martinez finished. Probably multiple someones. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a trafficking operation using the mall as a transfer point. They'd infiltrated the infrastructure itself, hiding their victims literally under the feet of thousands of shoppers. New plan, Wong decided. Chen, maintain cover. Martinez, get that girl's handler. I want to know everything about that storage facility before we move in. If there are really 12 kids down there. She didn't need to finish. They all knew the risks of a rushed raid, especially with children involved. But they also knew that every minute they waited was another minute those kids spent in darkness, waiting for help that seemed would never come. The note had changed everything. What started as an investigation into a trafficking network had just become a rescue operation. And somewhere beneath the cheerful commerce of the mall, 12 children were counting on them to notice what everyone else had overlooked. Chen resumed his patrol, maintaining his role while his mind raced through tactical options. In his ear, Wong coordinated with tactical teams, preparing for what would either be the biggest breakthrough in the case or its most devastating failure. The mall's regular bustle continued overhead, shoppers unaware of the drama unfolding beneath their feet or the silent war being waged in their midst. A war between those who turned away and those who chose to look closer, between those who hid evil behind normalcy and those who refused to let them succeed. A war that had started with 4 whispered words from a brave little boy, and now threatened to expose a darkness lurking at the heart of their community. The mall's loading dock was a maze of service corridors and storage rooms, all carefully hidden from public view. Officer Chen moved silently alongside the FBI tactical team, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls. The mall's head of security had provided access cards, but his hands shook as he handed them over. I swear I didn't know, he kept saying. They told us it was just storage, special client storage, high security. We'll deal with that later. Wong cut him off. Right. Now, focus on getting us to that red door. Martinez's voice came through their earpieces. First handler in custody. She's terrified. Says they'll kill her family if she talks. But she confirmed at least 10 children in the facility. Plus the 2 we saw transferred today, Chen added grimly. The security chief led them through a series of turns, down a maintenance ramp that seemed to descend forever. The air grew colder, damper. Emergency lights cast sickly shadows on walls that hadn't seen proper illumination in decades. There, the chief pointed with a trembling hand. Behind those storage containers. A red arrow, faded but visible, pointed to what looked like an ordinary maintenance door. But Chen noticed fresh scratch marks around the electronic lock, recent modifications. Reading multiple heat signatures inside, the tactical team's scanner operator reported. Scattered throughout the space, some very small. Wong organized their approach. Remember, children are priority. We don't know how the handlers will react when cornered. Chen, you've had the most contact with these. Kids, you take point with the rescue team. The breach was swift and precise. FBI Tactical disabled the security system, and the reinforced door swung open to reveal a sight that would haunt Chen forever. The old civil defense shelter had been converted into a series of cells, small cage-like compartments with basic cots and minimal facilities. But it was the silence that struck him hardest. A dozen children, aged from maybe 5 to early teens, and not one made a sound as the rescue team entered. "We're police," Chen announced clearly, showing his badge. "You're safe now. We're getting you out of here." One of the older girls, the one who'd passed him the note, spoke up from her cell. "Watch the back room. They keep guards there." The tactical team was already moving, securing the facility's far section. 2 armed men were taken into custody without incident. They seemed more resigned than surprised. "They knew we were coming," Wong observed. "Someone warned them." "But they left the kids," Martinez added through the radio. "Why not move them?" "Because we're insured," the girl said bitterly. "That's what they call it. If they lose us, they get paid anyway. Some kind of policy." Chen felt sick. They weren't just trafficking children. They had turned them into commodities, complete with insurance policies against loss. As medical teams moved in to check the children, Chen noticed something about their arrangements. The cells weren't random. They were organized by type. Some kids had books and better bedding. Others barely had blankets. "Special orders," the girl explained, seeing his observation. "Some of us are being customized for specific buyers. Training, education, whatever they want." The evidence teams were documenting everything, but Chen focused on the children themselves. Like Tommy, they all showed signs of hyper-awareness, constant environmental scanning. They'd been watching, waiting, looking for a chance to signal someone who might help. "How long?" he asked the girl as paramedics checked her over. "For me? 3 months, some less, some more. They move us around a lot. Different facilities like this one. We never know where we are, but we learn to look for people like you." "People like me?" "People who actually watch back. Most adults, they see what these people want them to see. A kid having a tantrum, a strict parent keeping order. They look away because it's easier." Martinez joined them, her face tight with controlled anger. "We've got IDs on some of the guards. Low-level muscle, but they're phones. These people have facilities like this in other cities. Multiple storage sites." "Storage," Chen repeated, the word bitter in his mouth. "They're children, not inventory." "To them, we're both," the girl said quietly. "And more. We're investments, merchandise, insurance policies, everything except human." The rescue operation continued through the night. Parents were being contacted, identifications confirmed, medical evaluations conducted. But Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they'd only scratched the surface. "The network's already adapting," Wong reported. "Our surveillance teams are seeing changes in their mall protocols. They're switching to new transfer methods. But now, we know what to look for, Chen replied. And more importantly, we know the kids are looking for us. The girl was being led out by medical staff, but she paused next to Chen. There are more of us, she said softly, in other places like this, looking for someone to notice. Chen nodded solemnly. We'll find them. That's a promise. As they emerged from the underground facility, the mall above was closing for the night, shoppers heading home unaware of the drama that had unfolded beneath their feet. But something had changed. The traffickers' perfect cover, hiding in plain sight, counting on people to look away, had been compromised. Because one boy had been brave enough to whisper 4 words to a cop who chose to look closer. And now, across the city and beyond, other children held against their will were watching, waiting, looking for their own chance to reach someone who would see past the carefully constructed normalcy to the horror hidden beneath. The FBI command center hummed with activity 24 hours after the underground facility raid. Evidence boards covered every wall, displaying photos of rescued children alongside maps marking potential storage sites in other cities. Officer Aing. Chen studied the patterns emerging, his cop's instincts nagging at something just out of reach. Insurance policies, he muttered, remembering the girl's words. They're insured against loss. Detective Martinez looked up from her laptop. We traced some financial records from the guards' phones. Shell companies, lots of them. But one name keeps coming up, Sentinel Security Services. Private security contractor, Wong asked, joining them. On paper, but look at their client list. Martinez projected documents onto the main screen. High-end, private schools, family courts, child protective services. Chen felt his blood run cold. They've infiltrated the whole system. Any organization that's supposed to protect children. They've positioned themselves to exploit it. Wong finished. The perfect cover. Who questions a security company working with kids? The interview rooms down the hall were full of rescued children talking to specialists, piecing together fragments of information about their captivity. But it was their behavioral patterns that interested Chen most. They're all like Tommy, he observed. Hyper-aware, constantly scanning their environment. The traffickers trained them to be observant. And that training backfired. Martinez picked up his thread. Because the kids used those same observation skills to look for help. Wong's phone buzzed. Another raid was underway in a neighboring state, targeting a facility similar to the one they'd found. But something bothered Chen about the timing. They're giving up these sites too easily, he said. After all the effort to stay hidden, why not destroy evidence when they knew we were coming? Unless, Martinez's eyes widened. Unless these sites are sacrificial, meant to be found. While they move their real operation somewhere else, Wong agreed grimly. Classic misdirection. One of the child specialists emerged from an interview room looking troubled. You need to hear this. The girl who passed the note? She says these facilities, they're not just holding sites, they're showcases. Showcases? For potential buyers. Important people who want to personally select their merchandise. The specialist could barely say the word. She overheard guards talking about upcoming viewings. Major clients coming to inspect the inventory next week. Chen's mind raced. That's why they left evidence intact. These sites are just the retail level. The real operation is wherever they're keeping the main group of children, Martinez finished. These facilities are just distribution points. Wong was already mobilizing resources. We need to track every vehicle, every transport method they've used. If they're moving kids between sites... Wait. Chen studied the facility maps again. Remember what the girl said about never knowing where they were? But they had to have been moved somehow. Underground. Martinez caught on. The civil defense, tunnels, Cold War-era infrastructure, abandoned but still intact. A whole network running beneath the city. And connected to other cities, Wong added. pulling up historical maps. These tunnels were designed to evacuate government officials. They run for hundreds of miles. Chen thought of the children being moved through dark tunnels, unseen beneath. The feet of people going about their daily lives. The perfect transportation system for human trafficking, hidden, secure, and forgotten by most of the world. "We're going to need structural maps," he said, "and someone who knows these tunnels." Already on it. Martinez pointed to a new face entering the command center, an elderly man carrying rolled blueprints. "Meet Robert Grayson. He helped design the Civil Defense Network in the 1960s. Grayson spread his maps across the table, revealing a maze of tunnels and access points. Most people forgot about these after the Cold War ended, but they're still there, maintained by skeleton crews, perfect for moving things, or people, without scrutiny. Or for storing them, Chen added, remembering the facility they'd raided. "How many other shelters are connected to this network?" "Dozens, and those are just the ones on official maps. There were also unofficial additions, sites that never made it into public records." Wang leaned forward. "We're going to, need everything you know about those unofficial sites." But Chen was studying the traffickers' known movements, overlaying them with the tunnel maps. A pattern emerged, one that made his stomach turn. They're not just using random sites, he realized. They're using ones connected to specific institutions. Schools, courthouses, government buildings. Places where children wouldn't be questioned going in, Martinez said, but might never come out. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a trafficking operation, it was an infrastructure of exploitation built into the very systems meant to protect children. "How do we shut down something this big?" one of the junior agents asked. Chen thought of Tommy's whispered words, of the girl's carefully dropped note, of all the children still waiting to be found. "We follow their example," he said. "The kids never stop looking for someone to notice them. So we don't stop looking until we've found them all." The command center hummed with renewed purpose as teams began mapping potential sites, coordinating with other cities, preparing for what would become one of the largest trafficking investigations in history. And somewhere in the darkness beneath, their feet, more children waited, watching, hoping someone would finally see past the shadows to find them. The entrance to the tunnel network was hidden behind a maintenance door in the city courthouse basement. Officer Chen followed Grayson down crumbling concrete stairs, the old engineer's flashlight beam revealing decades of neglect. Main corridors are still maintained for emergency use, Grayson explained, his voice echoing. But the side tunnels, the unofficial ones, nobody's mapped those in 50 years. Martinez and 2 FBI tactical teams followed, their gear looking oddly modern against the Cold War-era infrastructure. Agent Wang coordinated from above, monitoring their progress through a maze of tunnels that sprawled beneath the city like dark veins. "Temperature changes," Chen noted, feeling warmer air flowing from a side passage. "Some of these sections are still active." "Maintenance systems," Grayson confirmed. "Ventilation, power, minimal but functional, enough to sustain life." The implications hung heavy in the stale air. How many children had been moved through these forgotten corridors? How many were still hidden in the darkness? Movement ahead. One of the tactical team's sensors picked up heat signatures. Multiple targets approaching fast. They pressed against the tunnel walls, killing their lights. Footsteps echoed, growing closer. Then voices. "Clear the lower sections. Boss says burn everything. What about the special inventory?" "Moving them. Deeper. New facilities almost ready." Chen's radio crackled softly, Wang's voice. "Do not engage. Let them lead us to the main site." The footsteps passed their position, moving deeper into the tunnel network. Once the sound faded, Grayson whispered, "Urgently, they're heading toward the old command bunker. Supposedly decommissioned, but actually converted," Martinez finished. "Like the mall facility." They followed carefully, marking their route through the maze. The air grew colder, damper. Water dripped from rusted pipes, creating phantom echoes that made every shadow seem alive. Chen's flashlight caught something on the wall, Small scratches, deliberate patterns. The kids, he realized. They're marking their route, leaving signs for anyone looking. Martinez examined the marks. Numbers, dates maybe, and arrows. Breadcrumbs, Chen said softly. Even down here, they never stopped looking for help. The tunnel network sprawled in every direction, but the children's marks guided them deeper, following the traffickers' preferred routes. Every scratch told a story of fear, hope, and desperate courage. Grayson stopped suddenly, pressing his hand against a seemingly solid wall. This shouldn't be here. This section was supposed to end 50 yards back. Martinez's thermal scanner confirmed. Large space behind this wall, multiple heat signatures. How do we get in without alerting them? Chen asked. Grayson studied the wall carefully. These bunkers had emergency exits, designed to be hidden but accessible in crisis. Look for... His fingers found a subtle seam. A hidden panel clicked open, revealing a keypad thick with dust. They'd have changed the codes, Martinez started, but Grayson was already entering numbers. Some things don't change. These systems were designed to work even if main power failed. Basic access codes were built into the hardware. The wall shuddered, revealing a dark passage. And from somewhere beyond they heard sounds that made their blood run cold. Children crying. Multiple armed targets, the tactical team's leader reported, spread throughout the facility. They're destroying evidence. And moving inventory, Martinez added grimly, watching heat signatures being herded deeper into the complex. Wong's voice crackled through their earpieces. Strike teams are in position at other access points.
But Chen, if they realize they're surrounded... He didn't need to finish. Cornered traffickers with child hostages. It was every law enforcement officer's nightmare scenario. But Chen was remembering Tommy's careful observation. The girls' dropped note. All the silent signals from children who never stopped watching for help. They've shown us the way, he said. All these marks, these breadcrumbs. The kids know this place better than their captors. They've been mapping it all along, waiting for someone to notice. Martinez caught his meaning. We don't go in charging. We use their own observation posts, their hidden routes. To outflank them, the tactical leader finished. Hit them from angles they don't expect. Wong gave the order. All teams, prepare. For synchronized breach, use the children's markers. Let them be our guides. As they made final preparations, Chen studied the wall scratches one last time. Even in the deepest darkness, these kids had never given up hope that someone would find their messages. Now it was time to prove that hope wasn't misplaced. Time to show every trafficker hiding in these tunnels that their perfect underground network had been mapped by the very children they thought were helpless. The raid was about to begin, and this time they had guides who knew every shadow, every secret, every way through the darkness. The traffickers thought they controlled these tunnels. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The raid began with whispers, not from the tactical teams positioned throughout the tunnel network, but from the children themselves. Word passed silently through the underground facility. They're here. They found us. Officer Chen, following a series of scratched markers that led to a ventilation shaft, heard the whispers through his tactical headset. The FBI had managed to get microphones into several sections of the facility through the old air system. Multiple hostiles moving to the lower level, Martinez reported from her position. They're trying to move the children deeper. Not all of them, Chen observed through a grate. Below him, he could see children deliberately slowing down, creating confusion in the evacuation. Just like Tommy had done, they were making themselves visible to potential rescuers. All teams in position. Wong's voice came through their comms. Strike on my mark! Chen watched a guard grow frustrated with the children's slow pace. As he raised his hand to strike one, several things happened at once. The facility's lights went out. Grayson had found the old electrical controls. Cardance. Lighting kicked in, casting everything in a red glow that transformed the scene into something from a nightmare. And then the children moved.
They'd been practicing this, Chen realized. In the confusion, the smaller ones slipped away into hiding spots they'd clearly prepared. The older ones moved with purpose, creating chaos that looked like panic, but was actually coordinated. Now, Wong ordered. The raid hit from all directions at once. FBI teams breached through main entrances while specialized units, following the children's hidden routes, emerged from ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels. Chen dropped from his position as planned, immediately finding himself face to face with one of the facility's leaders, a well-dressed man who looked more like a business executive than a child trafficker. "Federal agents!" the cry echoed through the facility. "Drop your weapons!" Some guards surrendered immediately. Others tried to fight, but they were disoriented, their careful control of the facility shattered by the children's coordinated actions and the tactical team's precise breaches. "Chen," Martinez's voice was urgent in his earpiece. "We've got runners headed for the deep tunnels. They've got hostages." He was already moving, following markers only children would think to leave. Tiny arrows scratched at ground level, pointing to shortcuts through the facility's maze-like structure. The children's knowledge of the facility proved invaluable. While the traffickers tried to escape through main corridors, Chen and a tactical team used maintenance passages and ventilation shafts to cut them off. "Stop!" A man held a terrified young girl in front of him. "Back off or—" He never finished the threat. The girl, seeing rescue within reach, implemented what was clearly a practiced move. She went limp, dropping her weight suddenly. As the man struggled to hold her, a tactical team member took the shot. Clean, precise, non-lethal. Throughout the facility, similar scenes played out. The traffickers found their own methods used against them. The careful control they'd maintained, through fear shattered in the face of children who'd been secretly preparing for this moment. "Command center secured," Wong reported. "Evidence intact. They didn't have time to destroy their records." Chen helped the tactical teams clear the last sections of the facility. They found children emerging from hiding spots that even the facility's operators hadn't known existed. Tiny spaces, maintenance crawls, ventilation ducts. 43 children recovered, Martinez announced, her voice thick with emotion. All alive, all safe. The man Chen had first seen, the one who looked like an executive, sat handcuffed as federal agents went through his files. His careful facade had cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. "You don't understand," he kept saying. "The people we work for, the clients waiting for deliveries." "We understand perfectly," Wong replied coldly. "And they're next." The files would prove invaluable. Records of sales, client lists, corrupt officials who'd helped hide the operation. But Chen's attention was on the children being brought up from the facility, each one carrying themselves with a dignity that broke his heart. "You saw us," a small boy said as paramedics checked him over. "We kept leaving signs, hoping someone would see." "We saw," Chen assured him. "You did everything." "Right, you helped us find all of you." Martinez joined them, her face showing the strain of the operation, but also fierce satisfaction. The network's blown wide open. Similar raids are happening in 3 other cities based on the evidence we found here. It's over. But Chen remembered. Tommy's first whispered words, the girl's dropped note, all the silent signals that had led them here. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because now they knew what to look for. Knew that children being trafficked weren't just helpless victims. They were brave survivors who never stopped watching, waiting, hoping for someone to notice their signals. And now that law enforcement knew what to look for, no trafficking operation would ever be able to hide in plain sight again. The facility would be sealed, the tunnels closed. But the most important thing they'd discovered wasn't the underground network or the trafficking operation. It was the courage of children who, even in the darkest places, never stopped believing that someone would finally see them. As the last of the children were brought up to waiting ambulances, Chen thought about how this had all started, with 4 whispered words from a little boy who dared to hope that someone would listen. Those words had brought down an entire trafficking network, but more importantly, they'd taught law enforcement a crucial lesson. sometimes the most important. Clues don't come from surveillance or informants. They come from children who never stop looking for someone to notice them. 1 month after the underground facility raid, Officer Chen stood in front of a classroom of police cadets. The latest training program, developed from lessons learned during the trafficking investigation, was changing how law enforcement approached child protection. It's not just about looking for obvious signs of trafficking, he explained. It's about understanding that the children are looking for us. They're watching, waiting, hoping someone will notice their signals. In the back of the room, Tommy sat with his parents, invited to help tell their story. The boy who had started it all with 4 whispered words had become an important part of developing new protocols for identifying trafficking attempts. What we learned, Martinez added, joining Chen at the podium, is that these kids aren't just victims. They're active participants in their own rescue if we're willing to see the signs they're leaving us. The evidence recovered from the underground facility had led to hundreds of arrests across multiple states. Corrupt officials, wealthy clients, trafficking operators. The entire network was being dismantled. But more importantly, it had changed how law enforcement approached child protection. Every mall in the country now has officers trained in recognizing these signs, Wong reported during her presentation. And the children are noticing. Reports of prevented trafficking attempts have increased by 300% since we implemented the new protocols. After the class, Tommy approached Chen. The boy carried himself differently now, still watchful, but with confidence rather than fear. Heard they're calling it the Tommy Protocol, he said shyly. Teaching police to really look at kids in public places. That's right, Chen smiled. Because you taught us something crucial. Sometimes the most important evidence comes from the victims themselves. The rescued children had all responded differently to their freedom. Some required extensive therapy, others threw themselves into helping law enforcement understand trafficking methods. But all of them shared one common trait. They never stopped watching their surroundings. It's not hypervigilance anymore, the child psychologist explained to Chen. It's purposeful observation. They're looking for other kids who might need help, teaching them the signs they use to signal for rescue. The underground facility had been sealed, but not before every mark, every scratched arrow and hidden message had been documented. The children's improvised communication system was now part of standard training for law enforcement, teaching officers to look for the subtle signs that might indicate trafficking activity. We found 3 more yesterday, Martinez told Chen, as they left the academy. 3 kids in different malls, all showing the signs we now know to look for. All safely recovered before they could disappear into the trafficking pipeline. The old civil defense tunnels were being mapped and monitored, their hidden access points either sealed or placed under surveillance. But Chen knew the traffickers would adapt, find new methods, new places to hide their operations. That's why this training is so important, Wong said during the final briefing. We're not just teaching officers to look for trafficking. We're teaching them to look at children differently, to understand that even the youngest victims can be crucial allies in their own rescue. As the day ended, Chen found himself back at Riverside Mall, making his usual patrol. But now he saw the space differently. Every child's glance, every subtle movement caught his attention, not with suspicion, but with awareness. A young girl caught his eye, her behavior showing the same careful observation he'd seen in Tommy. When she realized he'd noticed, she gave him a small nod. Another officer trained in the Tommy protocol would have recognized it as a signal. "Officer," she said quietly as he passed, "there's a boy in the food court. He keeps looking at your badge the way we're taught to." Chen immediately understood. The rescued children weren't just victims anymore. They'd become part of an informal network, watching for others who needed help, passing information to officers they recognized as being trained in the protocol. "Thank you," he told her. "You did exactly right." As he moved toward the food court, Chen reflected on how much had changed since that morning when Tommy had whispered 4 desperate words. The trafficking network had thought they could hide their operations by making them seem normal, counting on people to look away from things that made them uncomfortable. Instead, they taught their victims to be observant, to watch for potential help. And now those same observation skills were being used to protect other children, to spot trafficking attempts before they could succeed. The boy in the food court was indeed showing the signs they'd learned to recognize. Within an hour, he was safely in protective custody, his intended traffickers arrested, another operation disrupted before it could claim its victims. Later, filling out his report, Chen added a note that would be understood by any officer trained in the Tommy protocol. Subject identified through peer recognition. Signal confirmed through established patterns. Because that was the real legacy of this case. Not just the broken trafficking ring or the rescued children, but the understanding that had emerged. The knowledge that sometimes the most effective weapon against trafficking wasn't sophisticated surveillance or undercover operations. It was the simple act of paying attention when a child tries to tell you something, of looking closer when something feels wrong, of understanding that even in their darkest moments, children never stop watching for someone who might help them. And now, thanks to 4 whispered words from a brave little boy, law enforcement would never stop looking back. End.